I've decided to share a couple of early memories of Murray. I think some of my earliest memories are sleeping in church. I think that every Sunday I would lay down on the bench in church and fall asleep. This was back when you went to church in the morning for Sunday school, and then you went to sacrament meeting in the afternoon. And I think I had a record for sleeping in church those early years that we were in Murray. We moved to Brigham City in the summer of 1960, so before I turned 8 years old. One of the other early remembrances I have is of my father coming in and waking me up in the morning, early in the morning. And for some reason I was sleeping in his bed. I probably ended up in their bed a lot, but this was in 1957, the summer of 57, so I was 5. And he looked at me, and with a big smile on his face, he says, "Hey, do you want to go to Disneyland?" And I, of course, said yes and was happy and jumped up, and so we were off for Disneyland. We drove I believe it was the old Pontiac, and it was Mom and Dad, Tad and his fiancee Tova, Alice and Van and me. Now this was, a front seat and a back seat, and that was it. So there was 3 in the front, 3 in the back, and then me. And a lot of the time I spent laying down in the back window above the back seat. And as we drove across the desert, this car didn't have any air conditioning, and Dad had a canvas bag that he hooked on the front of the car that was filled with water that would stay cold because of the wind blowing through it. And he also rented, I think, a evaporator cooler that mounted on the window, the back, the passenger door window behind the driver. And you'd have to pour water into it, and it would evaporate, and it had a little fan on it, and it would blow somewhat cold air into the inside of the automobile. I remember getting to Disneyland and visiting the Priggies. John Priggy was a little bit older than I was, and Mary was younger than Alice, I'm pretty sure. I think we maybe even stayed at their house one night. I'll post a couple of pictures from that family trip that Tad has sent me. I remember that there were times when we kids would get, in the summer, would get to sleep out on the deck. The Murray house had a concrete roof over the garage, and it had a railing around it, and we called it the deck. You entered it from Mom and Dad's bedroom, but every time I slept out there on the deck, something would come and bite my eyelids, and I would wake up with my eyes swollen shut. This happened 2 or 3 times, and but I still remember that I always wanted to sleep out on the deck. I remember that in the summer we would walk to Murray Park to go swimming, and we always stopped by a little store on Vine Street and bought candy. It was just east of the entrance into Murray Park, and that was always a lot of fun. I remember that one Halloween we made a spook alley in our basement, and we used Gar's prosthetic hand that was came out from underneath a door, and we had kids from the neighborhood that came through it. I remember that one time Alice and one of her girlfriends' mom said that they had to take care of me and that I had to, if they went anywhere, they had to take me with them. Well, she didn't want to do that, and so she tied me up in the upstairs bathtub and left me there. It didn't do too much emotional damage. I've only been in therapy for a few years. But I probably got back at her quite a bit because I remember that Alice was scared of bugs, and I could close my hand and I could say, Alice, do you want to see the spider I have, or you want to see the bug I have? And she would scream and I would chase her, and I had a great time teasing her with bugs. Although one time we did find a garter snake that we brought into the house that really did scare her. I was known to be a little bit of a pyromaniac. I once set the house on fire. I was playing with matches underneath one of the twin beds that were in Gar and Tad's room, and Mom had a basket of clothes that she had washed, and somehow I was playing underneath one of the beds with mattresses, and I caught the bed on fire, and then it caught the clothes on fire, and I got all nervous and stuff, and so I went in and I sat down by my dad in the Knotty Pine room, and pretty soon everyone could smell smoke, and they got out. He jumped up and he was able to put out the fire. It burnt one of the beds pretty bad, but I don't think it did any damage to the house. But after that, I also set a field on fire in back of the Days and the Andersons, and the fire department had to come, and I had to go over and confess to Mr. Anderson, who was the fire chief, that I can't remember who else had set the fire. I remember that there were times when Mom and Dad would leave the kids at home to go out on a date or some activity or something, and there were a number of times that one of the older boys, I don't know if it was Gar, Tad, or Van, they'll have to fess up, would run in and say, I just heard on the radio that there's been a serious accident with a tan Pontiac, and it's probably Mom and Dad. And this, of course, would make Alice start crying, and of course when Alice started crying, I'd start crying, but they did this 2 or 3 times. In the summer of 1960, we sold the house, and Dad got a new job at Thiokol up near Brigham City, and the family had built a home up there, a brand new home, and it wasn't finished. And so we commuted to Brigham City for a number of months. We'd get up at really early, like 5 o'clock in the morning, and Dad would drive to Brigham City, drop the older kids off for school, and then he'd go to work, and then when we got done, we'd pile up and drive back to Murray. That was something that I remember that we did. Okay, those are some of the memories that I have of living in Murray and some of the things that happened to me.